Hello and welcome to Playwright, a podcast about creating and sharing new ways to play. My name is Ryan Hamann, also known as H for the sake of convenience.
And I'm Ryan Quintal, also known as Q for the same sake.
And joining us today, we have a special guest, my boss, I suppose, on the Cane and Rinse and Sound of Play podcast, the brains behind that operation.
Is it almost an editor-in-chief?
Lead force, so to speak, but everybody contributes quite a bit to that team, so I don't want to undersell anyone.
Absolutely.
But anyways, you should be very familiar with the voice of Mr. Leon Cox.
Hello H, hello Q. Thank you for having me. Yes, I shy away from the editor-in-chief title because although it's true in terms of formulating content and sort of house styles and ideas, as we podcast and I do zero podcast editing, it seems bad to call myself the editor-in-chief. Like Ryan does a million more hours of podcast editing than I do. H, I should say. But yes, that is I. Cane and Rinse is my baby, along with Jay and Tony and the rest of the gang.
Mm-hmm.
We're happy to have you as not only from Cane and Rinse, but as the first non-Ryan to appear on this podcast.
An honor indeed.
It's true. For those who don't know you, I'd imagine we got more people coming to our show from yours than to your show from ours, at least at this point.
Well,
but
maybe at this point.
You have an extensive history with video games dating all the way back to the pre-console era.
Yes.
And you have a fairly exhaustive knowledge that is always impressive. You can pretty much just name any video game and Leon has something interesting to say about it. And so, you're really drawing from in this kind of very different venture of pitching a new video game idea. You're drawing from a long and storied tradition of deep study into video games.
Well, thank you. Yes, some of that's fair. What I would say is that I've never considered myself, this is just getting my excuses in early for my lame pitch. I've never considered myself an ideas man in the sense that I don't feel like as I've been playing for the last 40 years or whatever, I haven't constantly been thinking, if only somebody would make a game which had this element and that element. No, I think I'm quite good at taking existing concepts and honing them. I've even done a bit of freelance consultancy and things like that. I think I can explain what makes an existing game, enjoyable or less enjoyable, or what might make it more enjoyable. But in terms of just coming up with brand new raw concepts, I don't think it's something that I'm just that predisposed to. But we shall see. It may be that actually, if I really thought about it, maybe I've come up with thousands of ideas, but I've just kind of glossed past them in my mind. But we'll see. We'll see what you think. It's literally the only idea I've had coming into this show. So.
Yeah, well, and the majority of the show is workshopping anyways,
yes.
And so I think that you'll be right at home.
Yes, hopefully.
So anyways, let's hop right into that. Let's get into our first pitch of the day, and that is coming from Q. What do you have for us?
So I want to treat this idea delicately because I don't know how fleshed out it is, but let's pitch and then workshop. In an ancient land, a king dies and is going to be succeeded by his daughter and her prince. But as per usual in these things, the king's younger brother in his twisted mind has his own machinations. So he, the night before the ceremony, captures both or has them both kidnap the prince and the princess and sends them away to separate, faraway lands. Now, neither the prince or the princess know of each other's fate and they fear the worst, and then kind of starts the game, which is a Zelda-like, in my head, adventure where the prince gameplay is all swashbuckling and platforming, and the princess gameplay is kind of magic or roguey and stealth adventures, and you can GTA style switch between them at will, and each character, as they complete quests, kind of initiate story beats for each other. So maybe the princess rescues a carpenter and then a bridge is built, in the prince's game so he can access a new area. And they're both warned throughout their adventure that if either of them try to take on the, evil king's brother, they will surely die. So the goal is to complete their quest lines in a manner so that they both meet up at the same time, and then you have a sort of last boss battle where they are both, you can switch between them very quickly and essentially have your own two-player adventure only as one person. The reason why I'm pitching this is I really like the idea of both of them assuming that each other need their help so badly, but then kind of meeting in the middle and realizing, oh, we're fine, so let's do this together.
Cool. So let's go ahead and start the clock on that one. When you were giving that pitch, I thought you were going to go into like this being a permanent split screen game. You would have to play both at once.
Oh, wow.
Which would add some complications, but could be doable if the gameplay was simple enough, kind of like a more advanced version of Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons.
It has been done. There was a PS1 game, and now I'm doing that thing where I call a game from history. But
no, perfect.
But I can't remember the title in this case. But there was a split screen 2-player, 1-player game on PS1, so there is precedence. And also they did it in Ni no Kuni. There are certain stages in dungeons of Ni no Kuni where you control two characters, one with each stick, kind of thing. So that could be doable, but obviously it then takes the focus very much into a puzzle of coordinations, whereas Q's original idea is actually more about two separate adventures which eventually come together. There's also a game, a very, very great 1987 game called Head Over Heels, which was an isometric 2D game in the style of Ultimate. Pre-Rare Ultimate Play the game. It wasn't by them, it was by Rittman and Drummond. And you start off with a head and some heels. They're both sort of dog-like animals. And you have to solve all these screens, and ultimately, quite not that far into the game, you meet them up and then you work together, but they each have their own abilities. So there's definite precedence, but I'm not obviously everything's been done at some point in the past. So, but that was an absolute classic. So I'd welcome a return to that sort of gameplay. I also enjoyed Brothers. The only thing I would challenge would be the slightly stereotypical princess does the magic, guy does the swordy swashbuckling stuff. I think maybe that should be a player choice thing, which character does which. Yeah,
or even just a forced switch of those two roles, right? What I really wanted to do is find something that would subvert the princess who is just locked up the sort of entire time that Zelda could tend towards. True. And, your adventure to free them and rather have her have a lot of agency through the thing. So I think it's interesting that you highlighted like at what point they meet up. Maybe it should be earlier on in the story, and you're enjoying the sort of combat switching between them sooner more than a almost near-esque switch towards the end for one moment.
How about they come into contact sporadically? So you end up with certain sections like key points at the end of each subchapter or whatever, where so at least then when you're meeting when you're approaching the final showdown, you've had some practice of the quick switching in the same arena kind of thing.
Or maybe meeting other companions that have kind of comparable powers, and so you have some experience putting those two skill sets together, but it is still like a moment at the end when they meet. But anyways, one of the things that I'm curious about is you talked a lot about being able to switch characters at any point in time. I'm kind of left wondering, like, what advantage does that have over like a chapter ending and switching to the other character immediately? It feels like if these two stories aren't really interacting, if there's not anything you need to be really balancing in your mind, then that manual switching doesn't really do a lot for the idea.
Well, some of it was tied to the idea of that fail state of if either one of them gets to kind of the end of the journey without the other by their side, then it's like surely they can't actually take on the final mission, if you will. So, I mean, I think it would be a challenge trying to balance it so that like you don't play one person's entire thing and then the other, which is why I think, like Leon had said about them maybe meeting up at different times, those story beats of she has to do this really to unlock something for him, and he has to do this to unlock something for her. I almost kind of think of that moment in, I think it was Resident Evil 2, where if one player, if you're kind of playing as Jill and you take a flamethrower from a locker and you go replay the game as Leon, it's not there anymore. That's sort of maybe occasionally being on the other's path or having the world be affected by the other is interesting. And I don't know if it's used more for gating or more for reference and convenience. But yeah, you're right. I struggled, like maybe it should just be chapter 1, her, chapter 2, him, that sort of thing.
It'd be kind of interesting if you kind of played this on the scale of something like a Grim Fandango or something like that, where it's kind of a multi-year adventure and, you know, you could have the characters meet, but not directly. Like, you know, one character ends up getting a job working at a shipping company to try to make enough money to get back to the homeland, like Shenmue style. And then the other character ends up encountering somebody at the shipping company or having to do some assassination work for them on the side or something. And so I like their stories always kind of brushing up against each other and having these near misses with one another.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I mean, that would also help explain the fiction of like you save a carpenter and then there is a bridge, right?
Yeah.
That wouldn't happen overnight. I really like in The Witcher 3 when you have the moments of somebody's explaining to you a story of what happened with, say, Ciri, and then you're kind of playing that moment as opposed to, you know, watching a cutscene or something. So maybe if it is that kind of time-separated adventure, then you have a really interesting excuse for the players to be in the same space that you can kind of go back and forth to.
How about, I know, obviously, there's the danger of bringing in too many elements and it becoming unwieldy, but the game could be theoretically divided into 4 chunks, each of which is a season. And I know, obviously, we're looking at Oracle of Seasons here, but there could be some, that way you could easily bring in some environmental puzzles, plus it automatically gives you a way of making you could perhaps work with a smaller environment, but one that changes as time goes by based on the season it is. I'm also thinking, of course, of Click Clock Wood from Banjo-Kazooie.
Yeah.
Sure, and especially in a same environment from one season to the next would be far more difficult to traverse. Like, say, you know, the river is just closed in the winter, or the lake is suddenly something that you can walk across. You know, I know you had mentioned earlier, Leon, that you'd like to see the player sort of choose the abilities of each character, but I do think it would be important to preserve the feeling that each other would be strongly complemented by the opposite. So if there's almost like a, you know, do you want this pairing or this pairing or this pairing that you could toggle through, might be a little bit stronger as like presets rather than sort of go down your own skill tree. Yeah,
no, that's exactly what I meant. I just meant that you could flip, you know, I think you should absolutely define the ability sets of the 2 characters, and they should be rigid in the sense that they obviously have their own strengths and they start off with certain abilities. But I'm just saying that you should be able to simply flick the genders between the 2, so you can choose which one's the magic person and which one's the fighty person. It doesn't have to be, you know, female is one and male is the other. You can just flip them the other way.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
So the end battle, if you're playing through the entire game as one character at a time, then the controls are mapped so that they take full advantage of the full controller. When the 2 are together, how does that end up working? Does it kind of pair you with somebody invisibly like in Journey, or does it split the controls across the controller like brothers? What are you envisioning for this final battle when they do meet?
I in my head, the most satisfying feeling of a co-op combat has usually been the Arkham series, really, and the you know, the way that Batman will toss someone into the air and then he'll switch to Catwoman and then she'll hit him down from that flying move or whatever. But it's almost like no matter what, you couldn't touch one button on the controller, so that there's always a switch button, and you'd need that both in the adventure and then eventually in combat. So maybe you're right. Maybe there's times where they're meeting up, each of them together, and then when they're separated, there are other combat encounters where they do have another type of companion or something with them. So there is plenty of, or almost always, co-op combat. But it's like every companion is not quite the, you know, your princess or your prince, you know?
Yeah.
So H, you're talking about a potential for human multiplayer here, online or couch co-op, whereas Q, you were sort of pitching this as a single player affair, but I'm wondering if it could be either or both, again, which is something that's been done. And obviously we're seeing, I think, was it E3? Was it called The Breakout?
Is it A Way Out?
A Way Out.
It was?
That's it, which is I think it's very, very much leaning on multiplayer, the co-op idea that you're, and it's synchronous in the sense that you're both playing at the same time, but it's asynchronous in the same sense as this game we're talking about, in that you both have different strengths and you both have a different part to play. So it's not just a case of one of you can do this or one of you can do this, like Overcooked or something like that, where it's entirely the player's choice. And I'm not knocking that game. That's a great game. But obviously part of that game is deciding which roles you are to take at any given point, and actually the dynamic of constantly communicating with your partner about which role that they are supposed to be fulfilling at that particular point. Whereas in this game, it's more going to be about, well, obviously I have to do that because I'm the only one who has the freeze spell, or, whatever, or I'm the only one who can smash the log, or,
Yeah, some interesting ideas there. We're going to have to close the door on this one. That is our 10 minutes that we allow ourselves for each idea. So, Q, do you have a name for this game?
I wanted to go simple on this one, so I'm simply been calling it The Princess and the Prince.
All right.
It will sell 0 copies with that name, I'm sure.
Well, it hasn't been done before, so that's unusual.
That's true.
Cool. So we are moving on to our submission from our guest, Mr. Leon. What do you have for us today?
Okay, so this is inspired by some disparate games, I would say. The inspirations would be Thumper, Sega Rally, and Rhythm Heaven. So
perfect.
This is a game where you are in control of a rally car, traditional, cross-country rally across all the environments, snow and ice and mountain stages and all that kind of thing. Probably 10 stages in the game, because it's also a rhythm action game where the speech and the music are synchronized, basically. So it's all it's quantized kind of thing. In effect, in rally you have your co-driver. In effect, the co-driver's instructions will be kind of a rap,
like Parappa the Rapper style.
I guess that's another influence on that. Yeah, it hadn't actually crossed my mind. But the thing here is, as somebody who quite enjoys driving games but enjoys rhythm action games even more, one of the things I've never quite got from rally, whether it's Codemasters rally games or going back to the predecessors, the Colin McRae games, is I've never quite got that same sense of joyousness of kind of sliding round corners on rubble as I did from Sega Rally. And also, I've never quite got the same sense of peril and speed as I have from Thumper in terms of rhythm action or even racing. So my thought was that with the co-driver actually reading out the instructions to you ahead of the time, in the same way that Thumper kind of indicates to you what corners are about to come up, what buttons you're going to need to press when the next phrase of the music comes up. You can actually, your co-driver is basically saying, so it's a call and response thing. So he'll say, easy left 3 or whatever, and then you'll know to input the correct controls. But the good thing here is that you won't be tied to, because you're not having to control the car directly in the same way as you would in Forza Horizon or something like that, is that you can throw the camera about. You can show the outside of the car. You could have see the back wheel just scraping across the edge of the mountain and just hanging off the edge. You can use a whole kind of TV style dramatic camera, because so much of the game is to do with the audio, in the same way that Thumper is. Actually, it's a game that you could play even if you were partially sighted, probably, if you understood what the audio meant in terms of inputs, if somebody told you that. So that's my rough concept.
Cool. Well, let's start the clock on that one. I think it's an interesting idea. I kind of immediately thought that it would be neat if, since you have this co-driver who's calling out all of these commands to you, and then the actual driver who's responding to them, it'd be kind of neat if it was like a 2-player type of experience where one person has like a very traditional, like Parappa the Rapper, like line of commands they have to hit in time. And if they hit all those right, then the driver is going to get all the right commands. But the driver also has a fair amount of like agency over the driving itself. And so if he feels like, that command doesn't quite fit the beat like I would expect it to, then he can take a corner a little bit later, kind of compensate for any deficiencies in the commanding from the co-driver.
I really like the idea of there's a range of expression with cars that Thumper kind of can meet, but not really in terms of being able to e-brake into turns and how sharp a degree of turn is. And I really like the idea of mapping those to like fun words or something that your partner is calling out to you of like, lay into this one or whatever. You're almost driving on rails essentially, but
yes,
you can make it that moment that Forza Horizon can't really deliver, which is your car almost slipping off the mountain, can be really fun if you're super stylized and you're scripting those moments.
And going along with the music as well, like almost like those musical levels from Rayman Legends, where as long as you play it perfectly, then you're going to get this super satisfying, but there's a little bit of like elbow room for making mistakes every once in a while, and you're performing not only a musical task, but also using your like platformer sensibilities.
Weirdly, I also think of SSX too, in terms of, how when you're in the air in SSX, the latest, it kind of phases the music through a filter or something. Maybe that's, when you're taking a really dramatic turn, or when you're, hitting a series of beats in a perfect succession, and then you get that sort of NOS speed boost or something.
Yeah, absolutely. There would certainly be lots of, sort of heightened effects. And I think for me, the overall aesthetic would be, it would very much sort of go down the Sega Rally route. It would be kind of hyper real, blue skies, loads of wildlife, because the camera is able to kind of, go off the track. You could have lots of spectator response, stuff that you can't always pick out when you're playing a driving game. And I'd also like, without going down the route of complete sort of cliche and national stereotype, I'd like the 10 stages to be very distinct in terms of in country that they're based in the environment. And you could have, without it being totally traditional music from whichever country, it would be music that was influenced or tinged with the sounds that one associates with whether you're in Japan or Africa or whatever. And it could be contemporary, it would probably be contemporary music, but it would have traditional elements. I'd be looking to hit as big a kind of dopamine endorphin rush as possible from like synchronizing everything together. So this would be a real, feel good game. But equally, if you were messing up, it would get challenging, as Thumper does, and as all the best rhythm action games do. And similarly, the difficulty levels could stack in terms of how many controls you were dealing with. So effectively, like, you're doing the normal difficulty selection that you do in driving games with the assists on and off, but they relate to how often you need to input and how accurately you need to input, whether you're playing automatic gears or manual kind of thing.
Cars are great because they map to many things. So, and what I mean by that is, it'd be interesting to be on, say, the Japan track with a German car. And does your German car influence the instrumentation there? Or the age of the car? Does that influence what kind of you've got some old-timey, very classical music versus something very, new and modern feeling?
If you could do mashups in the same way that they did for like DJ Hero, that would be pretty awesome. I would also be looking at extremely heightened and detailed sound effects and spot effects for revving of engines and gravel and going through the slush and all that kind of thing. And lots of crowd roars and cheers and things like that, in the same way that Nintendo often deploys that stuff, a round of applause and some whoops for doing something good. There'd be loads of that. So it'd just be a real, it'd be a real blast. So you just come away. If you really nail, it'd be one where you would play the early track and play it over and over until you totally nailed it, and you'd come away with a real, a buzz and a grin on your face kind of thing.
I think this would be really cool as kind of like one of those stand-up arcade cabinets with an actual wheel. Like, there's something that I don't know. Thinking back, Guitar Man did this, where there's I don't know what the proper term would be, not necessarily analog, but kind of like a granular input for a rhythm game that is supposed to be very precise. rhythm games, you hit buttons and you know exactly when the button is depressed and you know exactly which button to hit. Whereas using a steering wheel, you have a little bit of feeling it out as you go.
Yeah, I mean, DJ Hero, again, is a great example of this,
Oh, yeah,
because you're
yeah,
actually you're using the fader to go across the lines, and you're spinning the turntable and that sort of thing. So it could definitely have analog inputs. It wouldn't just have to be all, obviously Parappa was 20 years ago now, and we've come a long way since then.
Yeah, it's interesting to think of the input less like the Rock Band Guitar Hero button press and more of an arrow that you're almost filling up by turning the wheel slightly to the right or the left in different extremes.
Yeah, definitely. And then maybe that could be slightly sort of transposed when it comes to like chicane sections and stuff, where that's almost your kind of QTE bit, in the sense that it's you've got this particular set of corners, and that's when the camera can go crazy, because you don't need to be looking necessarily. You get the instruction from the co-driver, you enact it with button presses or whatever, and then it kind of plays out in front of you. And yeah, lots of noises getting louder and cheering getting louder and that kind of thing as you nail it. Or similarly, if you mess it up, you want some feedback that encourages the player to do it better next time. So you want some near misses, probably no horrific fatal crashes or spectators being taken out or anything like that, but lots of kind of people ducking out the way at the last second and stuff like that.
That would be a very Sega Rally thing to do.
Yeah.
Now let's go back to earlier. I kind of put forward the idea of having a second player. And, we were talking about how cool it is having these like steering wheel inputs for, making this feel like a driving game that you are playing to a rhythm. But, if there is another character who is giving commands, then that would make sense to map those onto buttons, because, you're just kind of barking something out, and those are more kind of rhythmic, and you want to get the real precise timing on that because you're feeding very important information to your driver.
Yeah, I wonder how whether it would be an actual a couch co-op game, in the sense that you would actually speak out loud in the real world and give them the instructions based on information you were getting. This would be a game where certain formats would have a benefit if it was or you could have a companion app or something like that, where
that would be cool.
Where you had the co-driver has a companion app which is effectively a map. It's showing a map graphic, but actually what it is, it's a series of instructions, and then it's how quickly that they have to read them and interpret them.
Or it's got a metronome, and so you have to hit it on the beat, and then maybe the map could be color-coded and divided in such ways that where the beat is going to hit, and so you can issue your commands pretty precisely because it needs to be like right on time.
Absolutely, but it could even be that I'm thinking that the player themselves just has to relay it. If you're playing co-op, this is purely co-op only, couch co-op. The player actually just simply has to vocalize in real life, and then the driver player has to interpret those. But it's the co-driver's job to make sure that they've given the driver the rhythm properly. So it's because, again, as with Thumper, you're effectively being given the rhythm ahead of the maneuver. So it would be, for instance, left, right, left kind of thing, but you would have to interpret it, but you would have to still be listening to the music and keeping the rhythm in mind. So you both have to be, aware of the rhythm of the music.
There's just something about this whole idea that feels very natural in terms of how it maps. When I play a Forza Motorsport, when you have a controlled set of tracks, you commit those to memory almost like you would a song. So to have, to know that the final stretch of a Rock Band song is particularly complex, or where the solo is, I think maps extremely well to learning a track. And I mean, they're literally both called tracks, right? And,
yeah, true.
And getting joy out of that alone.
Yeah, and I'm also now thinking, you're talking about, an arcade machine with a steering wheel controller. Well, actually, all our home controllers pretty much have some kind of potentiometers or accelerometers or whatever in. So you could definitely replicate that in the home with tilting of controllers.
It's right. I'm using tilt controls, the rhythm game.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Anyways, we're going to have to wave the finish flag on that one for now. If anybody has anything more to add to that, we encourage everybody to get in contact with us on social media at PlaywrightCast on Twitter, or leave a comment on our website, playwrightcast.com. If you have more to say, more ideas to add to these, because they are continually living and growing even after the recording is done.
Mm-hmm.
So, Leon, I don't want to put all the pressure on you to come up with a name. If you have something, great. If not, we can workshop something together.
Working title, Rhythm Action Rally, but that is just a working title. I don't have
That's
anything.
not bad. I like that. Cool. Rhythm Action Rally. Let's go with that then. All right, we have one pitch left today. This is a community submission from Sam Quirke, who has submitted before. Always lovely to hear back. Sam says, premise is a light-hearted opposite to Shadow of the Colossus. Long ago, humans created makers, colossal beings part animal, part machine, to turn a barren wasteland into a habitable space. Over time, humans forgot how to make or fix them. Now the makers are dormant and the land is dying. You are the last Remaker, apprentice, and your task is to repair each maker and bring life back to the land. Gameplay. Environmental puzzling in which you switch between the boy Remaker and the maker he's trying to fix. Remaker uses platforming and puzzling to get around and fix parts on the maker. The maker moves their body to create new paths to complete bigger tasks that the Remaker needs to progress. The challenge lies in understanding how each maker moves. Aesthetic, much friendlier and more wholesome than Shadow, but with some of the rusty melancholy from Machinarium. Risk reward, for me, he says. Each maker has limited energy left to move, so you have to choose your movements carefully. A secret collectible per maker is only available through alternative movements to the main solution, meaning careful use of energy. Efficient solutions result in a more stable maker, and better rejuvenation results of the landscape. Maker ideas, he gives us 3 here. A tribe has set up in a maker's eye sockets and is using the lamps for fuel. Get rid of the humans and then guide the blind maker to the replacement candles, which are too high up for the Remaker to reach alone. Twin makers each have breaks in their different limbs. They must make connections between each other for Remaker to travel across and to fix each issue in order. And a snake-like maker is trapped in a dungeon and is panicking. Remaker must calm the beast, and they can work together to pull down a massive iron gate barring the entrance. All right, we've got a lot to work with there, so let's go ahead and start the clock on that. That is a super cool idea.
Yeah.
I really like this. It's just the general aesthetic. He mentioned Shadow of the Colossus right off the bat, and that's something that came to mind as it was all being described. And I like this idea of not only platforming on these giant, colossal beasts, but like they are creating environment as they go, creating these kind of like abstract, impossible landscapes, kind of like you would get in a Super Mario Galaxy or something like that.
I'm hoping that these friendly makers are less prone to trying to shake you off than the Shadow of the Colossus. Like, I'm thinking more of from my point of view, I would more enjoy the feeling of scaling one of a 3D Mario's kind of intricate levels, hopping up ledges and having to do, nice twirls and quirkefleagues and curly muffins to get up the giant edifice that is these things. And I suppose, you could maybe you could vary it up so that some of them are a little bit more or more reticent to be helped, in the sense that they're trying to get rid of you. But I think some of the early ones could actually be, in need of oiling, but like the Tin Man and Wizard of Oz kind of thing. They actually want you to help them, but they're so rusted over and whatever that they can't help you. So they're just kind of giving you indications somehow of where you need to go and what you need to do. It does sound like a wonderful idea. I'm already getting flashes I'm thinking of those amazing bits in Okami where you bring life back to the land. I'm thinking you could have some stunning cutscenes where, like in fast forward, like pseudo time lapse photography, after you've brought the maker back to life, you see their work in sped up time, so you can see the joy that you've brought back to the land.
Yeah, or kind of like a Studio Ghibli type thing where these makers are non-hostile, but they're also kind of like programmed to do one task, and so they don't know that because they are glitched or all gunked up or something, they're actually polluting the landscape by just doing their job. And so once you once you kind of clear up whatever is going wrong inside, it doesn't necessarily change their behavior, but it changes their output, and what they're creating is not dangerous anymore, and that's how they're able to help you in, your future adventures.
I'm thinking of Wall-E.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and there are in fiction reasons, I think, to make transversing one of these makers a lot more palatable necessarily than like the Colossus trying to shake you off, because humans did make these things, right? So obviously we would probably want to make it easy to service
Access
them.
points. Yeah.
But I do like the idea of them sort of outputting bad or good, and maybe even choosing, you have limited energy for these makers, so what order you help them could really matter. So if you're, for example, I could help maker A to unlock this because it's really going to give me ability for maker B.
Kind of like Mega Man style.
That's exactly what I was just going to say. Yeah, Mega Man. Yeah.
There's something about that. Yeah, especially if it's almost one of the things about Breath of the Wild that is kind of sad is that you can't really fix the land anymore, right? So the idea of being able to restore it back to life or make it populated again and make the world seem more alive as you play is really cool.
I haven't played Horizon Zero Dawn yet, but I'm also wondering if there's anything to be learned from that, because I think those games, people I know who have really enjoyed Horizon have said that there's some real, obviously I think the mechanical dinosaurs are on the less friendly end of the scale. But I think there might be stuff to be gleaned from that in terms of scaling and interacting with these larger beings. And as you say, Breath of the Wild as well. Of course, there are things that you climb on. Obviously, in Breath of the Wild, you've got the 4 sacred beasts, which are effectively giant mechanoids that you get to interact with. So there might be some things to learn from that as well in terms of the physics of the insides of the machines and the way that you sort of solve the puzzles by interacting with the mechanics themselves to give yourself access to other areas and whatever. But as you said, Mr. Q, you could certainly base your access on most of these things around the fact that humans made them. But of course, over time, ladders could have rusted away or, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it is interesting to tie the on the ground, the apprentices' abilities and their ability to access areas to exactly what you could fix on the makers, right? So, I could actually get this maker X amount more energy or this additional ability if I choose to go down and level up skill A, B, or C. I'm curious are you guys picturing a linear progression through the story or more of a do this in whatever order makes sense to you type of thing?
Oh, whatever order seems to be a elegant enough solution. I like that.
Yeah, I think obviously in terms of development, and obviously, when we're doing these, we're not talking about budgets and things like that and time. We're just workshopping. But if we're going for highest possible reach, then absolutely, I think your sort of Mega Man idea would be fantastic.
The one thing I'm having a really hard time wrapping my mind around is the overall scale of these makers. Sam kind of put forth the idea of Shadow of the Colossus, which are like big creatures, but not enormous. And then one of the examples he uses is a human civilization built in one of their eyes, which would be, much bigger. But I think something along the scale of one of those new Breath of the Wild dungeons feels appropriate.
Yeah. Rather than, I mean, that would just be off the charts. But yes, you could have, maybe it could be a game where there are, rather than the, how many is it? 12, 16, 18, however many colossi it is. This could be a game where there are 4 absolutely massive makers, four really huge levels that you and that would actually make the idea of tackling them in any order slightly more manageable, because obviously the more variables you have in terms of that, if you have 15 makers, then it's going to be way harder to gate the player correctly or work out the difficulty challenge. Whereas if you have 4, you can kind of make that interaction slightly less mind-boggling.
True.
Yeah, and I think one thing to learn from Horizon Zero Dawn potentially is, yes, you have the really super big dinosaurs, robot things, but you also have smaller scale ones. So the ability to like tame a smaller maker that all its job was really to clear trees or something, or one was really just to erect certain structures, and those are almost your smaller Zelda dungeons populated throughout,
like the shrines.
Yeah, the shrines where you can kind of accomplish a small thing, get a meaningful result that helps you along the way, but it's really the big, 4 or 5 whatever main makers that are the pillars of the story.
That's clever. Yeah. Well, my favorite thing is when we were talking earlier about going inside these beasts as well, kind of like we've seen in Breath of the Wild. But even before that, the first thing that came to mind, and now I can't shake the idea that maybe this is what inspired Breath of the Wild. But I was thinking of Banjo-Kazooie and Clanker's Cavern, how you're platforming all along this giant mechanical shark. And at various points, you can go into the shark to fix various things, but you're loading separate rooms and everything. So it'd be really cool if, like in Zelda, it's just one kind of contiguous space, and you can use the mechanical parts on the outside to help you swing into various openings to get in the inside and, unclog engine bits and whatever. It's a really cool bit.
There were those bosses in Minish Cap, weren't there, as well, where you go inside?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if either of you had seen the pretty cheesy, I think, 80s or 90s movie called Inner Space.
Yeah.
I think it's the second time on the show you've actually brought this up.
A sort of semi-remake of Fantastic Voyage.
And there is a weird genre version of this game that is less like you are people and going into giant robots, and you are somehow shrinking and going into normal size things, which is very entertaining to me.
Yeah, I think you could definitely maintain the fixing things, the kind of the feel good, the constructive theme of the game by expanding on your idea, Q, of the kind of the smaller makers is actually have mini makers which service the makers themselves. So you're repairing the maker by repairing its janitors. It's true. It's maintenance bots kind of thing.
Cool. We're gonna have to shut this one down for right now. Excellent idea, really magnificent to think through, and I think that I'm going to be imagining various scenarios from this one for a really long time. I really love this one, so thank you very much, Sam. The title that he proposed, which I actually like, I feel like it's a good title, is just Remaker. It's our main character job, and it's an interesting part of that game's fiction. So let's close off that one. That is Sam Quirke's Remaker.
You could use a colon like in your podcast title.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. That is the end of this week's show. Thank you everyone for listening. And if you have an idea that you would like to submit as well, then you can pitch that over to playwrightcast.com/pitch. You can throw it to us on Twitter @playwrightcast or email us at playwrightcast@gmail.com.
Special thank you to PROTODOME, whose music Hello World off the album Blue Noise is available on Bandcamp, and also our theme song. And I'll be the first to kick off to thank you, Leon, for essentially coming to us and doing the opposite of what you do on Kane and Rince, wild speculation.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun. Yeah. Ideas come once you open up that little envelope in your brain, the things start to fall out, don't they?
Mm-hmm. We hope that anyone who isn't already a listener to Kane and Rince and Sound of Play, then please do check those out. I can vouch for those being very good because I am also on that team. I get to hear the rough edits and I get to hear the finished product, and it is brilliant all the way through every step of the process consistently. So week to week, Kane and Rince has really interesting, really in-depth conversations on video games from all eras of gaming, and Sound of Play has a really eclectic assortment of video game music.
Thank you. I want to play all these games now that we came up with.
That's the hardest part of the show.
That's the hardest part,
you have to remember that these don't actually exist once you're done talking about them. Maybe someday. And just to give the audience something to think about on the way out, how about a competitive water slide constructor? We'll see you next week.
Bye.